As you know, the AFN is busy with their winter assembly this week in Ottawa. The Prime Minister was also there just days ago to talk about the proposed pipeline linking Alberta to the northwest coast of British Columbia. Last week, Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith signed a memorandum of understanding to build one. Paskwâw Strategies' Jennifer Laewetz is here, and so is Winnipeg Free Press columnist Niigaan Sinclair. Your turn to go first this week, Niigaan. Is it safe to say that the AFN stuck to a rights-based agenda this week, as opposed to internal infighting by addressing the Prime Minister in person about his proposal for a new pipeline from Alberta to the West Coast?
Well, it's hard to say that they're unanimous, but whoever was there was unanimous. Of course, missing major contingencies or constituencies, around from Alberta, which of course has a lot to do with the Alberta-Canada Memorandum of Understanding involving this pipeline. So what we've got who's ever there at the AFN, which is probably the majority. And not only is it the majority, but it also includes a very key area of BC First Nations, and for the rest of the chiefs in the country to stand with those BC First Nations, to stand up for Indigenous rights and to say that there is simply not going to be some sort of dictation from the Canadian government or the Alberta government on any resource project without First Nations involvement from the outset, not some sort of consultative role way down the line, but that First Nations have to be involved in a key area involving even just becoming, let's say, the proponent or becoming the very first stage of even the idea coming to the surface. So would I say that there is a rights-based commitment? Yes. I think, though, it's very indicative of some of the toxicity that the Canadian government is revisiting after 10 years of very progressive steps. This Carney government is very much looking much more like Stephen Harper than Justin Trudeau.
Is that how you see it, Jennifer? And where does the Assembly trying to oppose this national building project leave us, especially with just about every Alberta chief not being at the Assembly and the Assembly passing a resolution to reject the pipeline?
Well, it's kind of hard to understand, at this point, how the government can talk about consultation in the way that they have been when we saw Bill C-5 go forward as fast as it did, and then the conversations around a pipeline come immediately afterwards. I did watch some of the House of Commons clippings where, they were saying we would never build a pipeline without consultation, but you just ran through Bill C-5. So on the AFN front, it's how effective are you actually in this space anymore if these things are being rammed through as quickly as they are? And, we had that roundtable discussion or whatever it was where all the chiefs were brought into Ottawa, during the height of Bill C-5, and AFN kind of facilitated some of that, but it was just so rushed. It was one day. And I think it's at the point now where we are seeing nations across Canada assert their own jurisdiction and say, you know what, these bigger bodies or political lobbying groups aren't actually speaking for us anymore. Go back to the grassroots. And it's going to be difficult, but just start with the treaties. Treaty 6, Treaty 8, Treaty 4, go back to the nations within the treaties. That's where it all starts. And I think the higher level some of these different political organizations get, the more, out of touch they seem to be getting. And I don't know if AFN even has the political weight anymore to even stop a pipeline, even if they wanted to. I think that this is all going to be back to the grassroots, back to the members, and to the chiefs of these nations that are actively advocating, as we've seen in Alberta.
And Niigaan, Chief Linda DeBassage and quite a few others were very vocal, telling the Prime Minister that boil water advisories would be a no-go in Ottawa or Toronto. This is a bread and butter issue that did make it to the floor. We know all about this, but will the Prime Minister actually do something other than give more promises?
I just want to revisit just a second ago what Jennifer said. This is literally the most liberal-friendly AFN you could ever have. When you have National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, who's the former chair of the Aboriginal People's Caucus of the Liberal Party. Like, name me a more liberal-friendly AFN. And yet you still have these issues involving First Nations being an afterthought for many of these resource projects. Now, getting to the boil water advisories, can we be done with the idea that boil water advisories is some kind of policy initiative of the federal government? Why don't we just treat Indigenous peoples like human beings? Like, let's try that out. Let's stop saying, oh, well, we're going to deal with boil water advisories. Like, how about we just don't even converse about it and you just do it? Because the fact is that First Nations but in theory, anyways, according to the Canadian government, are part of the Canadian state, part of the Canadian government legally under the Indian Act. And so they should be treated like every other Canadian, to be provided just decent infrastructure in which you can turn on your tap in your house, have decent water. Not only that, water you can drink, water you can use for your brushing your teeth, water that you can use to raise your family and to thrive like every other. The fact that we're even talking about this as some sort of goodwill of the government to deal with boil water advisories, that's what they're talking about when they say this is a no-go issue. Like, why are we even when the prime minister is being asked, okay, why is consultation, why are you not consulting, why are you not including us with resource development projects till way in the back end? And his answer is, well, we're going to deal with boil water advisories. That's not an equal or. Like, there should have been dealt with years ago. It should have been dealt with under the government of Justin Trudeau, and arguably he did deal with 2/3 of them, but we've still got a third left to go. And we have to treat Indigenous peoples like human beings. Like, how many times do we have to say this on this panel, in the Canadian government, pretty much every single day? Why do we have to keep saying this over and over and over again until finally people just stop saying this is some sort of gift and say that, and it's just a right?
And Jennifer, speaking of bread and butter issues, aside from the pipeline, is the AFN effective in bringing about actual improvements in the quality of life of ordinary First Nation members, generally speaking?
Well, that's what it goes back to kind of what I was saying on the panel about, I don't know about the AFN's effectiveness. And Niigaan was absolutely correct in saying this is the most liberal aligned AFN that we have had, especially when we have people, and there's nothing wrong with being politically involved. I advocate for things like that. But I think it's tricky when you have so much political involvement that there is some hope that maybe there will be a good relationship there, but we're not actually seeing it. And not only that, I think people often forget too that, yes, there is that weird relationship between the AFN and the federal government, but then there's relationships between the people and the AFN. And there's trust there. There's chiefs that do not believe that the AFN speaks for them. And I think we are starting to get more back to that treaty grassroots conversations. And I think this even leads into the conversation about Roseanne Archibald and what happened there. I think that did fracture some of the trust amongst nations and leaders when they saw that play out the way that it did. The AFN is a lobbying organization, but you're only able to effectively lobby when you know the people that you're supposed to be lobbying for. You cannot just go out there and say, this is exactly what we want, and then you host an annual General Assembly where we saw that there's a limited opportunity for chiefs to even ask the Prime Minister questions. So what is the AFN doing to get more of the treaty rights holders in front of our federal government? And what is that going to look like in the years to come?
Niigaan, the former national chief, is naming some pretty heavy hitters in her claim, like Perry Bellegarde and Bobby Cameron. What do you think the impact of this case will be?
More division, more conflict, and I think the question of whether there's enough smoke to suggest a fire has been simmering for years. And going back to the days of National Chief Bellegarde, there are certainly a number of dubious questions that have been listed in terms of procurement, in terms of budgeting, in terms of some of the ways in which the office was left for subsequent national chiefs that have now continuously talked about there being a funding problem at the AFN and a governance issue and so on. Okay, so here's the fact of what this is all going to lay out to be. It's probably not going to go into a public eye because the fact is that the AFN isn't a government. It doesn't have any duty of responsibility to the public. While it may be the right thing to do, it's not the legal thing that they have to do. And so they don't have to provide the level of transparency that, let's say, a municipal, provincial, or federal government. There's no FIPA here. There's no freedom of information. And so that means that we are really at the mercy of those who are in charge, who all have their own political agendas, their own perspectives on the issue. And I don't think we'll ever become clear on what happened, whether the removal of Roseanne Archibald, the long-standing challenges involving the AFN's governance structure, funding structure, whether everything's on the up and up. So what we're going to be left with is just a whole lot of people pointing fingers and dividing into different groups, as Jennifer said earlier, and it will further fracture the AFN. I'm not here to pronounce the end of the AFN. I've been fooled in the past to think, oh, we're heading towards some sort of break, but I am absolutely certain that there will continue to be more divisions like chiefs that don't come.
Last closing remarks to Jennifer about the Archibald fallout here. Go ahead.
I think just really quickly, it's frustrating. Like it's kind of at every level now. We're seeing it with organizations. We're seeing it with lobbying groups. It's I've talked about the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, some of the turmoil internally there, FSIN, AFN. I think people are just getting exhausted and getting tired, especially when we're seeing the increase in crises like we have been, addiction, mental health, homelessness. Now more than ever, we don't just need talk, we need action, we need strategies, and we need to combat them collectively, especially here on the ground in Saskatchewan. It's freezing cold where I live. Homelessness is increasing rapidly. It's time. It's enough. Enough is enough. We need leadership from everybody involved, and we need these organizations and groups to be operating effectively.
Jennifer and Niigaan, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for your time.
Yeah,
Thank you.